Today, a big conference here in Washington, D.C., on the question of, is it time for a new populism in this country, with some leading progressive Democrats or politicians or leaders, so let's say public figures on the program, including Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congressman Keith Ellison, all put together by Robert Borosage, who's the founder and president of the Institute for America's Future and the Campaign for America's Future, joining us in the studio this morning. Hey, Robert, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
That's a huge day. You got a great crowd there.
There's going to be a lot of energy. And our argument
that's an exciting lineup.
Yeah, our argument is that there already is a new populist movement, that this is a populist moment, and it's starting to build, and this conference is going to kind of plumb the outlines of it and what it includes and what the agenda that's starting to emerge is about and why it exists.
Boy, that's great. The one name I didn't hear is Bill de Blasio. Huh?
De Blasio, we invited. He was going to do a tape for us, and then his schedule got screwed up. But we were excited about having him, and almost did.
But when you look at de Blasio, and you look at Elizabeth Warren, and you look at Bernie, and you look at Keith Ellison,
Sherrod Brown will be there.
Sherrod absolutely should. So this, it's here. The time is here, right? It's happening. And it's getting a response.
And it's out in the country. So this is, Occupy 160 cities, putting Gilded Age inequality in the center of our debate. It's Moral Mondays movement. Reverend Barber will be here. With thousands of people demonstrating, hundreds getting arrested in civil disobedience against the attempt to suppress the vote in North Carolina, and now spreading to South Carolina and Georgia. It's the low-wage workers in protests across the country against kind of their exploitation and demanding a higher wage. It's cities and states across the country that have already raised the minimum wage. Seattle headed to $15 an hour. So this thing is moving right now.
California, $15 an hour as well.
California raising taxes on the rich to invest in education. So the agenda, much of the agenda that's gotten obstructed at the national level is moving at the state level. But there's a broader debate starting about an economy that only works for the few and doesn't work for most Americans, and the dangers of an entrenched plutocracy arising that has too much money and too much power and uses that money and power to preserve its own privileges. And you sort of see it blatantly with the Koch brothers, with Sheldon Adelson convening the Republican presidential candidates as if they were sort of toy soldiers that he could play with.
I know. Yeah.
And this is traditionally in American history, this has, from Jefferson on, sparked opposition. Americans do not easily abide kind of aristocratic wealth, self-perpetuating wealth. The original populist movement.
I was going to ask you just there. When was the golden age, or the original populist movement
came out of 1800s? The late 19th century, late 1800s, out of the plains from small farmers and workers who were facing the railroads, the trusts, the great banks that were impoverishing them, making it impossible for them to survive. And what made that movement different was, when they started to organize, they railed against big government, because government had given the railroads the lands. They were coddling the monopolies. They were cracking the heads of any worker that tried to organize. But they realized as they got into it, they couldn't simply dismantle government and cut back its powers. That would just leave the monopolies open to exploit them even more. They had to find a way to take over government and make it their instrument. So they started to mobilize people to take on what Roosevelt called organized money. They had to develop an agenda, new ideas, sweeping new ideas that really created the basis of what was the progressive agenda for the next 75 years, 80 years. A minimum wage, an 8-hour day, the right to organize, cracking down on monopolies, antitrust, ends of crony capitalist subsidies, expand the direct election of senators, referendum and initiative so citizens could operate. They even educated millions of farmers about a new monetary policy that would lower interest rates and make money easier for debtors to be able to buy their seeds at the beginning of the year and reap their crops at the end.
Who were the leaders of this movement at the time?
They were they had
who are the heroes of the progressive
There were many
movement?
different heroes.
Is Teddy Roosevelt one of them?
Teddy Roosevelt became started sort of co-opted much of their agenda.
Yeah.
William Jennings Bryan on the Democratic side co-opted much of their agenda, but these were people who came out of the Midwest.
La Follette from Wisconsin. Is that
one of the expressions was La Follette. They were unknown people, so it was people like Mary Elizabeth Lease who went out across the Midwest and told farmers, you got to raise less crops and more hell,
I mean, I think of Hiram Johnson in California, early 1900s,
Later,
right?
Yeah.
Who the whole citizens initiative and referendum movement and taking on the railroads. I mean,
right, and you had the muckrakers, you had Lincoln Steffens, you had McClure's magazine that you had that whole thing that sort of exposed the trusts.
So we do see this happening today, I believe, again, with Keith Ellis, the people that are, a lot of them at your conference today, right? Elizabeth Warren in particular, Bill de Blasio getting elected, talking about income inequality. Right. And yet you've got a House of Representatives which tilts so far to the right and is like the do-nothing Congress of all time, and a Senate where you're even lucky if you get the Democrats to agree or to get anything done, and they can't because of the use of the filibuster. So, I mean, this Congress is really out of sync with what's happening around the country.
Right.
It seems,
locked up.
Right?
It's locked up and shut down, essentially. And, that's not surprising. This stuff is very hard to do. When you start to take on changing the rules of the economy so it doesn't work for the few and it starts to work for the many, you have to change our trade policy, which is dominated by multinationals. You have to change our monetary policy. You have to change the way, an incomes policy that lifts the minimum wage but also curbs the CEO pay patterns that let them benefit by plundering their own companies. You have to empower workers again to get a fair share. That generates great resistance, not surprisingly, from those who make out like bandits in this economy. And so they can buy and sell legislators. They always have. Our system is designed to clog things rather than to facilitate change. So it takes great resistance. Thomas Piketty, the sensation of the day with the best-selling 600-page book on
Populism,
wealth, right? Says, look, the middle class we built after World War II was an anomaly that, for most part, entrenched wealth protected itself and reproduced itself. And it took a World War, Great Depression, to wipe out the strength of that capital enough that an emerging policy could build a middle class. So this is against great odds. It'll take a long time. It's not one election. It's not going to change tomorrow. It's certainly not going to change in the fall. But what we argue is the conditions now put us in this populist moment, and people are increasingly aware that the game is rigged, and it rigged against them. And no matter how hard they work, they can't get out of the box they're in. And that creates the conditions for a different kind of politics that will challenge both parties. You see it with these new leaders emerging.
Yeah. Is there a little echo of that in the Tea Party?
There is, but the Tea Party, what's interesting about the Tea Party is two. One is it's enormously well funded by the Koch brothers and the billionaires, so you can see it as simply
who are acting against their not against the Koch brothers' interests, but against the interests of the people, right?
Yeah, but you can see this as a kind of false front of populism. Yeah, and the Tea Party doesn't make it doesn't make the decision that the populists made. It doesn't realize it just wants to tear government down, cut government spending, rip apart regulations. It doesn't seem to realize that the people have to empower themselves to take over this government if they're going to control the banks and the multinationals that are robbing them blind.
No, exactly. I mean, they're used as pawns by the Koch brothers, right? Who they'll raise hell in order for policies that will benefit the Koch brothers but still hurt the people, not help their situation, if you will.
Yeah, there's always this way it's formulated. Well, do people think big government's the problem, or do they think big companies and big banks are the problem? The populist position is, look, big banks and big corporations control big government unless we organize and take it back. And the only instrument we have is the democracy that gives us a shot at putting rules around these guys so that the economy, the rewards of growth are widely shared.
Oh, this is a moment. It's enough to make a progressive's heart flutter with excitement here.